because he knew more than anybody that medicine, really all medicine is a placebo in reality. But there are asbab, and the asbab are real. So the asbab, they're not to be belittled or anything like that. Now, the next section is Khaybar. Khaybar, obviously, if we remember, Bani Nadir made a treaty with the Prophet in Medina, and then they were treacherous. And so they were banned, exiled out of Medina. Some went to Syria, and others they had groves, date orchards in Khaybar, which is about 100 miles north, slightly, I think, northwest of Medina. And so they went to this place, and they began to just concern themselves with that. And if you also remember, they took out all of their wealth, and one of the stupid things that they did out of their arrogance was they exposed all of the women's hodages. They left the curtains open to see all the jewelry and all the gold, and they were just showing off. But this was something that the Muslims would remember, obviously, so there was a lot of ghanima, or booty, in them. They were also warriors. These people were warriors. They were actually very strong fighters, and they had a lot of weaponry, including catapults and what are called dabbabat, which were like armored vehicles. They were made out of wood, and the men would get under them, and they could go up to the fortress so the arrows wouldn't penetrate them. And it was a way of getting safely to a place. So what happens is, the Prophet ﷺ, because of Bani Nadir's continued treachery and all of these things that were going on, the Prophet ﷺ prepared them to go to Khaybar. And one of the things, immediately all the Bedouins show up. And because they know Khaybar is filled with riches. Now these are Bedouins that would not go on other journeys, nor did they go on the pilgrimage. So they were not permitted to go out onto this, despite the fact they would have increased the numbers and made it very easy for the Muslims, because it was clear their motives were dunya. And the Prophet ﷺ did not want people whose motives were worldly motives to be amongst the believers. And so they were not allowed to go. And the Prophet ﷺ sets out. Now one of the things is that Kinana, who was basically the chief, sent to Ghatafan, who were their allies. And you remember Ghatafan was one of the tribes at Al-Ahzab, the trench. He sent them there, and they promised that they would come. And what the Jews would do at Khaybar, every day they'd put on all their chainmail and go out and do their military exercises. So they were getting ready for this. They thought Ghatafan would come with a lot of troops. And they actually do go out to Ghatafan. But on the way, they heard a voice saying, Ahlukum, Ahlukum, Ahadikum, your families, your families. And they got afraid. They all went back. And they didn't find anything wrong with their homes, but they decided not to go out again. So they were actually prevented by Allah from going there. Now what happens is, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions the story of Abu Abs, in which he was very poor, and he came to the Prophet ﷺ. He had a camel, but he didn't have. He was in rags. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ for something to buy some clothes. The Prophet gave him a beautiful cloak that somebody had given to him, and then he saw him without the cloak, with another cheaper cloak, and he said, "Where's the cloak I gave you?" He said, "I sold it for 8 dirhams, and then I bought dates for my family and for myself on the journey, and then I got this one." The Prophet laughed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said, you and the others, because he was people, Ahl al-Sufa and the other people, he was from a poor family. He said, "You're poor now. In fact, what's poorer than you?" And he said, "But there's coming a time soon when you will have your hands filled with wealth, and it'll be bad for you." In other words, it's going to affect your deen. And this is something that the Prophet, in another time, he actually said to some of the Sahaba, they were sitting, and he said, "What do you think about a man who every morning he gets up and puts on a new robe, and then in the evening he changes his robe, and then he eats during the day foods and things?" And they said, "Ya Rasulullah, that sounds like a great situation, and all of us would wish something like that. He said, there's people coming from my ummah that will do that. La khayra fihim. There's no good in them. And he said, and you, all of you, are in a much better state today. And again, this is just the idea that the Prophet ﷺ told them that poverty was not what he feared for his ummah, but wealth. And then what they set out on their camels, and one of these men, Ibn al-Aqwa, he had a beautiful voice, and the Prophet asked him to sing the camel songs. They called these people al-Hadi. Al-Hadi was somebody that yahdu, he would sing, and there's two opinions amongst the Arabs. Some say camels don't like songs. It makes them go faster to get the journey over. But the dominant opinion is that because the song is beautiful, the camel gets a shawq, like a yearning, and so it moves faster to get to the journey, to have the journey end. Like the man said, Ya naqo, siru anaqan fasiha ila Sulaymana fanastariha. Oh my camel, he's singing the song to him. Ya naqo, oh my camel, quick, take broad steps so that we can get to Sulayman and get relaxed and find repose. And this was a way of getting the camels to move fast. So he sang the song, لولا أنت ما اهتدينا ولا تصدقنا ولا صلينا. He sang the song that the Prophet ﷺ had taught them. And when he finished, the Prophet said, رحمك الله. And when Umar heard that, he said, wajabat, he's for Jannah. Meaning that was like a shahada. Because the Sahaba realized when the Prophet usually said that, shortly thereafter, the man died a shaheed. Now when they get to Khaybar, basically Khaybar had these fortresses, and there were several of them. And one of the interesting things about these fortresses, and they had these towers, and they would shoot arrows from them. The fortresses were not together, and they had an underground river, like a canal flowing into the fortresses, so they didn't even need to bring water in there. And when they got there, the Jews all went in. Now what the Jews had decided to do, and partly because there was a lot of trouble amongst the Jews, and this is what Allah said, تَحْسِبُهُمْ جَمْعًا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى. You think they're all united, but their hearts are actually dispersed. And then Allah says, why ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, because they're people that don't have intellect. And so when they came, the Prophet ﷺ, one of the things that he said was خَرِبَتْ خَيْبَرْ, which is what they call jinas. It's like an alliteration. It's very good alliteration in Arabic. And he was saying, Khaybar is destroyed. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, on the first day, they attacked these first fortresses, and the Khaybaris were rumat. They were great archers. So they were shooting at the Muslims, and the Prophet ﷺ, there's another riwayah that he actually kept them at a distance so that they wouldn't be affected. But there were people that were becoming wounded. They were getting wounded from these archers. And the women who came on this journey, Salama had been given the qara'a when they did the qara'a, the lots. When they cast the lots, Salama was given her lot, and then Safiya and also Nusayba and Anas, Sulaim. These Ayman come. So Safiya is the Prophet's aunt, not the Jewish woman who becomes Muslim then becomes our mother. So what happens is, for 5 days they're like this, nothing's happening. On the 6th night, Umar radiallahu anhu is on watch, and he captures a Jewish man who they take to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ promises, he says, إِذَا تُؤَمِّنِّي أُخْبِرُكُمْ, if you give me aman, not kill me, because a spy usually meant death if he was captured. Ayn, they called them. And he tells them, he shows them how to get in to this fortress. And so they take the fortress, and from it they get these manjaniq, right, the catapults. And they also get these dabbabat. And so what happens is those enable them to get to the other fortresses. So this began a big victory now. But the first powerful, after this first fortress falls, because they're having a difficult time, the Prophet ﷺ says, tomorrow I'm going to give the banner to a man, يُحِبُّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولُهُ وَيُحِبَّانِهِ. He loves Allah and His Messenger, and the two of them love him. Everybody, they said that night, they were all hoping that they would be that person. Sayyidina Umar, he said, it was the only time in my life I wanted to have imara. He said it was the only time that I desired a position of authority in his life, which shows he didn't have any hubb al-riyasa, love of leadership. But that day he wanted it, because they knew that was a person of Jannah. And the next morning, he brought this banner. It was a black banner that they called the eagle, and he brought the black banner out, and he asked, where's Ali ibn Abi Talib? And they said, he has ophthalmia. And so the Prophet had him brought, and he put spittle into his eye from him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which cured him, and then he gave him the banner. And so Ali went out, and there was actually a Jewish warrior named Marhab, who was very powerful, and he comes out. Ali radiallahu anhu kills him, and then they have an opening, and from there, and Abu Dujana also was there, and these others, Zubair ibn Awam radiallahu anhu, and they actually finally this fortress there surrenders, and then obviously the Jews upset that Bani Ghatafan betrayed them. Now the next, they go to the next stronghold. These are Husun, they called them. And one of the things that the Messenger of Allah did was he cut down their date palm. He wanted them to surrender, and he was given permission by Allah to cut down the date palms, which was something that the Arabs did not do because it was like telef. A date palm takes a long time to grow into fruition. And so the Prophet ﷺ did not want, in fact he commanded Abu Bakr when he went on the jihad, he commanded him, don't, لا تقطعوا أشجارا مثمرة, don't cut fruit-bearing trees. Is one of the things that you're not supposed to do in jihad. But he was given permission, and the Arabs actually faulted them for doing that. And Allah announces that it was by the izn of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they did it. And the reason that they did it was to prevent more bloodshed. In other words, sacrificing the fruit trees was less of a disaster and a fitna than actually Muslims dying, and also Jewish blood being shed. So they did that, but the Jews didn't respond. He cut down about 400 of their date palms, and they didn't respond. He was hoping that they would say, he's going to cut down all our palms, let's surrender. And they didn't, so he told them to leave it. What happens is that as these Husun begin to fall, they come to this last section. And this is Kinana, who, if you remember, Huyay is the one that convinced Kinana in the first place to break his oath. And Kinana, he was foolish, and finally, after about 15 days, he decides that they will they'll negotiate. And so Kinana tells, and one of the things also that's not mentioned here, or actually he does mention it, I think, is about the cutting off the water, and that was a way of getting them to surrender also, because one of the Jews showed them where the source of the water was flowing from, so they dammed it up. So these are all indications that in war you can use things to bring people to their knees, so to speak, like cutting off food, cutting off water, in order to end the war, because people will surrender usually when they get to a point where they can't take it, which is better than killing, going into battles and losing life. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said, "La tatamannaw liqa al-adu." Don't desire to meet the enemy, but if you meet him, fathbutu, right? But when you meet him, be firm in your meeting him. So the Muslims are not bloodthirsty in that way, right? I mean, shahada is a high thing, but the Muslims are not bloodthirsty, and that's important here. Now, one of the things that he decides that the Prophet ﷺ says that he will negotiate with them, but there's condition. One of the conditions is they give all the wealth to the Muslims, they have to leave, and then he brings all these Jews out to witnesses, and then the big Sahaba. So they're all witnessing this, and it's very important, this stipulation, because he says, he stipulates that if anyone hides anything, then he forfeits the treaty. Right? So he's not going to kill anybody. He's agreed not to kill them, but under the condition they don't hide it. Well, Kinana, right, he's hidden a lot of his wealth. The other Jews know it, because they can see when they're bringing out the wealth, they know what he had and it's not there. And some of them actually go to him, and now he points out something which is very true. By this time, a lot of these Jews are recognizing this is a messenger of Allah. And part of the problem with the Jews was that they said, we follow Moses, Musa. We're not going to follow another prophet, especially if he's not from us. And so the Prophet gave them that choice. They chose to stay with the Torah and Musa, and the Prophet confirmed them in that. He did not force them to change their religion. So at this point they're going to Kinana and they're telling him, just give him what you have, because you can't fool him. Haven't you learned yet? And he says no, and he rebukes them. They go out, and then just after that they find the treasure. Now this is important because his family, Safiya, who's the wife, now goes under the Sabaya. She's part of the booty, because other Jews actually are going to be allowed to leave, but she goes under the booty. And then the other Jews in the two remaining fortresses here, they surrender with the same terms, and then they ask the Prophet ﷺ that they should be left, because they know their farms, they know how to farm them and irrigate them, and to leave them, and they'll pay as a rent half of their crop. And the Prophet agrees to that, ﷺ, but he stipulates that at the time that he chooses for them to leave, and he will do this right before he dies. He actually tells that لا يستمع دينان على جزيرة العرب. And Omar verified with absolute certainty that that was said, and after that expelled all of the Jews and the Christians from the Arabian Peninsula, except for workers that came in to do specific work or something like that. But as communities, after that, they could no longer live on the Arabian Peninsula. It was actually prohibited for them. So he did allow them to do that. And then also there were Jews here, another group of Jews of Fadak, which was a rich oasis to the northeast. They heard the terms, and they were worried about being attacked. So they actually send, saying that they'll do the same if he'll let them, and the Prophet ﷺ did. Now, Salam ibn Mishkam, who was one of the big Jews who was killed, his widow makes a roasted lamb and invites the Prophet ﷺ, and some of his Sahaba come with him, and she poisons it. And one of the things she did was she asked which was the favorite piece of meat for the Messenger of Allah, and she was told the shoulder. So she puts extra poison there. Now the Messenger of Allah ﷺ comes, and Bishr ibn Bara was with him, radiallahu anhu, and the Prophet takes a piece, and then Bishr takes a piece but swallowed it. The Prophet ﷺ tasted it, and then the shoulder actually said to him, Ana masmuma, I'm poisoned. And so he spit it out, and he told his companions, don't swallow it. Bishr had already swallowed it, and it was very fast-acting poison, and he literally died in front of them. So this was a mu'jiza of the Prophet ﷺ. And and obviously they would have waited for the messenger to take the first piece, right? And she knew that as well. So what happens is he asked the woman to come, and he asked her, who told you to do this? And she said, my husband, my father, my uncle, they're all killed at your hands. And I said, if he's a prophet, he's going to be told that it's poison. And if he's not a prophet, then I've freed us from the tyranny of another tyrant. And so when he heard that, in the riwayah of Ibn Ishaq, he forgave her, afa anha. And in another riwayah, he forgave her for his haqq, but she was punished for killing Bishr, because that's blood now, dam. In any case, the Prophet did forgive her. Now, Kinana writes, Kinana, who is killed, and then because he hid his widow Safiya, who's the daughter of Huyay, who had persuaded Bani Qurayza to break their treaty with the Prophet ﷺ. And he'd been put to death after the trench. She was 17 years old, very, very beautiful woman. And she had a dream that the Prophet ﷺ, that there was a moon coming from Medina, and it moved all the way to Khaybar and then dropped onto her lap. And she woke up and she told her husband Kinana that. And when she told him it, he hit her very hard, and he said, you're desirous of the king of Arabia. Which she wasn't, because she was actually an incredibly pious woman. Before her conversion to Islam, she was a very pious Jewess. And in fact, Huyay, who was a leader of the Jews, when she was young, she used to hear them discussing the Prophet ﷺ when he first came to Medina, and she actually had heard one night when they were saying this is a false prophet and this and that. They went out to meet him to test him to see if he was a prophet. When they came back, she overheard them saying that he was a prophet, but they weren't going to follow him because he was not from the Jews. So here's a woman who really had been exposed. She's the son of one of the leaders of the Jews, and then the wife of one of the leaders of the Jews. So she would have heard a lot of discussion about them. And these were people that knew the Torah, and they knew these things. Safiya, radiallahu anha, there was Dihya, there was a man actually, it's Dihya I think, right? Does he mention it? Yeah, it's Dihya. Al-Kalbi, Dihya al-Kalbi he saw her, she was very beautiful, and he wanted her, and he asked for permission, and then the Prophet gave her permission, gave him permission to take her as a ghanima. And what happens is, the Prophet ﷺ saw the cut on her face, and he asked her how that happened. And she told him the dream, and then he knew that actually that she was from the Ummahat. And so he gave her a choice at that point. He told Dihya, take her cousin. And then he said to Safiya, I give you two choices. One, you're free and you go back with your people, or you can be my wife. And she said, Akhtar Allah wa Rasuluhu, I choose Allah and His Messenger. And so he married her, and on the way back, he consummated that marriage. Now, the other thing that happens, and there's some important things that are going to occur after this. The other thing that happens is on the way back they go to the Jews of Wadi al-Quran and their fortresses, and after 3 days they surrender on the same terms. And remember, the Ibn al-Aqwa, who was the singer, he's martyred at this. And in fact, he was actually killed by his own sword, and the Prophet ﷺ, they said he wasn't a martyr because he died at his own hand. The Prophet said, no, he's actually swimming in one of the rivers of paradise now. And that's a proof. Anybody that goes out fi sabilillah and dies for whatever reason, that's martyrdom. So, now, whom lovest thou most? This is really about Aisha radiallahu anha. And this is an important chapter because, well, a few things. When Ja'far radiallahu anhu comes back, he had left at the age of 27. He's now 40. So it's been 13 years. He's a grown man. And although there had been all this communication, the Prophet had not seen him in 13 years and loved him immensely. This is somebody who is the son of one of the closest people to the Messenger of Allah, and he's the cousin of the Messenger of Allah. And so he actually did say, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, I don't know what is a greater rejoicing for me, the victory of Khaybar or the coming of Ja'far. And it's one of a few times that the Messenger of Allah ever stood up for anybody. He actually stood up when Ja'far came. He stood up and embraced him. Now, Ja'far and Asma was his wife, and the three sons, Abdullah, Muhammad, and Aoun, who were all born in Habasha. And then Habiba's come, and there was a compartment prepared for her. Now, she was 35 years old by this time. So she's an older woman, and she's not a lot of threat to Aisha radiallahu anha. I mean, she's not going to view Habiba in the same way. Because Aisha was the favored wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she did have ghaira. She was jealous by nature, and we saw that earlier with Zainab. But with Safiya, Salama comes. Now, Salama had reminded her that Zainab wasn't as beautiful as she actually thought. In this case, then, Salama has come now and told her, wait till you see Safiya, right? So now she's really worried because Safiya was a very beautiful woman, and the Prophet was very happy with her. And then also, all of the women of Medina were always happy when the Messenger of Allah married, and part of the reason is that he did not have any children except by Khadija, and they were always hopeful that with another wife that he would have children. That was a real hope, because people get happy when somebody they love has a child. It's natural, and so they were always hopeful. So here's a young woman, 17 years old. She's a widow, but nonetheless she's young and childbearing years, and so they come out and they're all greeting her. Well, Aisha goes out. She wants to see the competition. And she's really distressed because she was very beautiful. And she actually did call her a Jewess. The Prophet said, how did you meet Safiya? She says, yes. And he asked her, what did you think? And she says, Yahudiya kad Yahudiya. She looks like a Jewish woman like other Jewish women. And the Prophet told her, La taquli, don't say that, because she aslamat. She's a Muslim now, so don't say that about her. And when they used to get angry at her, they used to call her Bint Huyay, and they would also say Yahudiya, right? And in fact, Safiya was so troubled by that. She went to the Messenger of Allah, and in this narration he gives one, but in another he actually told her to say, قُرِ لَهُنَّ أَبِي هَارُونَ وَعَمِّي مُوسَى وَزَوْجِ مُحَمَّدٍ. So tell them my father is Harun, right? Because she was an Aaronite. Tell them my father was Harun. Tell them that your uncle is Musa and that your husband's Muhammad. In other words, he said, one up them. And she did do that. Now, the Aisha radiallahu anha will say later, interestingly enough, that Safiya does become a friend of hers, and that Hafsa, Safiya, and Aisha were very close. And Sauda, because Sauda was like a mother to Aisha, and the other wives were in another grouping. And then Aisha radiallahu anha is about 16 years. Now, one of the things the Messenger of Allah said to her, and this is also another sound narration, that he said, I always know when you're upset, Aisha. And she said, how do you know? And he said, because when you're upset with me, you say, وَرَبِّي Ibrahim, by the Lord of Ibrahim. But when you're happy, you say, وَرَبِّي Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So she's a forthright woman. She did not conceal that. Another time, and this is, again, the sagacity of Aisha and her intelligence, he came from Salama, and she said, أَلَا تَشْبَعُ مِنْهَا, don't you ever get tired of her? And then the Prophet just smiled, because this is ghayra, it's some jealousy. And then she asks him a question, and this is qiyas. She says, Ya Rasulullah, if you have two sides of a mountain, one's been grazed and the other hasn't been grazed, which one would you take your animals to? And he said, the one that hasn't been grazed. And then she says, well, I'm the only wife of yours that never had a man before you. Right? So nobody's grazed me, right? In other words, I was a virgin, and those other ones, they've been grazed, so you shouldn't go there. So Now, this is a really important thing here, because what he mentions here, that Aisha radiallahu anha knew that the Prophet ﷺ was not like other men. She was one woman, and the Prophet actually was like 40 men, according to the riwayah, not 20. And the revelation had said, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, you're on an immense magnitude of character or nature. It was as if there were he was a world in and of himself, comparable to the outer world, in some ways mysteriously one with it. She'd often noticed that if there was a roll of thunder, and the Prophet, when he heard thunder, became very agitated. Once, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it was raining, and he went out, and he just, lifted his head up and allowed the rain to come onto his face, and he said, "This is a rahmah, fresh from the presence of the merciful." So the Messenger of Allah was a human being that was in complete state of divine awareness, so that the creation to him was just constant manifestations of Allah's attributes. And to be around him, obviously all of these people would have just been in that state, so he would bring them into that state. So despite the fact that Aisha radiallahu anha was like that, he also said, and I think this is very beautiful, she knew that jealousy, unlike love, was for this life only. Right? In other words, there's no ghaira in Jannah. And ultimately, and this is what's important, because there's an event that's about to take place where they're given the choice between the dunya or the akhirah. And one of the things that Aisha said that's very profound is she said, there was no wife that I was more jealous of than Khadija, which is extraordinary, because Khadija was dead before Aisha radiallahu anhu had ever become a wife. So the reason that she was jealous was the fact that the Prophet once, he would always talk about Khadija. Also, whenever he sacrificed or food was given to him, he would send food to the friends of Khadija. So he never forgot even the friends of Khadija. So Khadija had a place with him. And one of the things that Bernard Shaw said, which I think is very, very profound,